I saw some of the projects that you've been involved with, the museums and being an automotive historian for so many years. Tell us what prompted you in the industry. How did you begin?
Well, gosh, an interest in cars. My goodness, that goes way, way, way back. Somewhere in an old photo album, I know there's a picture of me at about probably age 5 at Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, sitting in a sand race car that somebody made. It looked like a midget race car. And there I am, happy as a clam, sitting in this little sand sculpture race car. So, I mean, it started at an early age. I think really the great passion developed probably at about age 10, 11. At that time, I was with my parents in Santiago, Chile, and one of the weekend activities was always to go to the golf club, the Club de los Leones, as it was called, and still is today. And while my sister would be in the swimming pool and my mother and father would be out schmoozing, mom would be playing golf, dad would be usually in the bar with his friends from the Ministerio de Relaciones. I would be in the parking lot waiting for this great arrival. And the great arrival was Mr. Kovacs coming in his beautiful 300 SL Gullwing coupe.
Wow.
The great playboy Tata Gelona, who had a BMW 507, and a chap from the American Embassy who had just taken delivery of a brand new Thunderbird. And let me tell you, at that age, in fact, at any age, seeing those cars who would race from Santiago to the club, pull into the parking lot was exciting. The winner, of course, had to pay for drinks for all of the others, in the bar that day. So, I mean, it was a huge activity. And boy, I tell you, that got me completely hooked. So ever since then, cars have been a passion. Museum work, well, that's what I've been, my profession has led me into. And I've had the honor and pleasure of serving any number of museums, both in Canada and the United States. And the last one for the last 10 years has been my involvement with the Seal Cove Auto Museum on Mount Desert Island in Maine, and probably the best job I ever had before I retired, and absolutely adore the museum and loved living up in Maine.
What a great gig.
Great story.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sounds like an amazing story.
Tell us about Amelia this year. Were you actually there, or just the Seal Cove was represented?
No, the Seal Cove was represented. I couldn't make it down, unfortunately, but we've gone several times to Amelia Island. The last time I was there was in 2014. That was the year of the great gathering of the American underslungs. And we took a absolutely fabulous one that we own. I can tell you more about it later if you want to hear about it. But that was my last time. But our team was down this year, and a special new group they had for this year were electric cars. And so they had beautiful early electric cars as well as brand new ones on display. And we took a 1922 Detroit Electric down, and the museum did, and by golly, to our utter joy and amazement, we got a class win. So we got an Amelia trophy. And
I saw that car.
Taking the car out on the field. So that was pretty cool, beating out folks like Wayne Carini and his electrics and so on. Kind of
people don't realize that electrics started, that electrics were around before gas or in the very, very early days. People think it's all a recent development, electrics, but no, right?
Our listeners know this because we've reported on this many times on the history of electrics.
Yep. I mean, it started that way.
The earliest car at the Amelia Concourse was an electric car. It was an 1895 car. Wow. It was a funny name. I had never heard of it before. I got it written down somewhere, but yeah, it was 1895.
Did it have an iPad on the dashboard?
No, that was an option back then.
No, it was more like a stone tablet. It was like Flintstone style.
What's your opinion about the new Roberto? What's your opinion about the new this new verge into electric automobiles these days?
Well, kind of mixed feelings. Obviously, being a sports car guy, I've always loved my fast gasoline-powered cars. But after a few rides in electric cars and seeing that sense of acceleration, they're pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't know. I probably will not live long enough to own an electric car. I am very
Say
happy
that.
with my present gasoline-powered car, and it probably will last me for the next few years. But it's a wonderful technology and absolutely extraordinary and fascinating, as you're alluding to see this return to electrics. Because boy, back in the early 1900s, they sold like hotcakes. I mean,
Really?
you had these three technologies of steam, gasoline, and electric, and each one vied for market share and swap back and forth. The steam cars appeal to guys who like to go fast. The gasoline cars, well, they were available and gas was cheap, but the electrics were marketed to women primarily and doctors. If you think about it, in those days, cranking a car, a gasoline-powered car for a woman, my gosh, that was unladylike. She could break her arm. It was, absolutely something that a lady would never do. But an electric car, quiet, easy to drive. I love our little Detroit Electric because, for instance, the seat next to the driver faces the rear. So, you had this kind of little clubhouse in the car, and I can just sort of picture them going serenely down the road with this lady manipulating the tiller, carrying on a long conversation with their friends in the little.
Yeah, it won't be long before
Really
all the
cool.
seats can face to the rear.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Autonomous. It didn't have the iPad screen, but it surely wasn't autonomous back then in 1895.
So tell us a little bit about the Seal Cove. What's in the collection there?
Well, the Seal Cove focuses primarily on brass era cars, early American cars, primarily built in the Northeast. The collection is fabulous. I mean, these very early brass era cars are extraordinarily beautiful. I mean, big brass headlights and brass radiators, and there's a certain charm to them. And you really don't see them much anymore, other than in museums. Obviously, there are groups that love to still collect them and take them out on brass and gas tours, but they're a bit of a handful. You can't get up to highway speeds on them, so you don't see them showing up as you used to years ago at concours and car shows to the same extent. But the collection that we have at the museum is focused on them, and we have some absolutely beautiful ones. I was just thinking earlier that imagine we have 5 brass era automobiles that have competed in the London to Brighton run.
Wow.
On display at the museum. I think we got more than any museum in England has of them. So 5 London Brighton
Robert,
cars.
that's a throwdown.
No, I was actually going to
There you go.
say to Robert, and he beat me to it, come over to the London and Brighton run. It's fantastic.
I would love to, and I'm hoping that one day the
We'll see
museum,
it.
in fact, will take one of the cars over and do it again. It's quite extraordinary. Back in, I think it was 1960, the Antique Automobile Club at the time of America sponsored an Anglo-American tour, a Jubilee tour, and a number of cars went over to Great Britain. And my gosh, a couple of the cars were invited to participate in the London Brighton run of that time. It was the first time not an American car was there, but that an American participated in the London Brighton, as far as I know. And one of the cars was a 1904 Cadillac. And we own that Cadillac, and it's on display at the museum, and it's absolutely spectacular. And
Fantastic.
so that's kind of cool to go to a museum and see 5 London Brighton cars,
Wow.
as well as some other absolutely extraordinary cars that are past that brass era period, but are stunning and extraordinarily rare. That American Underslung that I mentioned to you is one of my absolute favorites. It's a Traveler, and it used to belong to Isabel Well Perkins Anderson, Now, if any of you have gone to Boston, some of you have probably been to the Lars Anderson Museum. This car belonged to Mrs. Anderson,
Wow.
and it was purchased for her to use in Belgium when her husband, Lars Anderson, was made Minister Extraordinary Plenipotentiary, or in other words, ambassador to Belgium. And this was her car to drive around. And they brought it back to the United States and was in the Lars Anderson collection for years. All of this we know because on the door, there's a small monogram or logo, I guess, that says Captain Ginger. And that baffled us at first. But some research led us to realize that Isabel Well Perkins, amongst other things, wrote children's books. And the character in her children's books was this Captain Ginger.
That's cool.
In
That's a great story.
1947 or 48, just before she passed away, by golly, she gave the car to a relative of hers, Briggs Swift Cunningham, the famous race car driver, Le Mans developer, and so on and so forth. And Briggs drove that car in any number of the Glidden tours in the late 40s and early 50s. And then the car ended up at his car museum in Costa Mesa, California. Later, when Briggs Cunningham sold the car collection to Miles Collier at the Revs Institute in Florida, the car went there. And then from the Revs Institute, for reasons we don't quite know, but that car ended up coming to the Seal Cove Auto Museum. It was a gift to the Seal Cove Auto Museum.
Wow.
And so we have this car absolutely original condition.
Amazing.
That beautiful
love
paint
that.
and that beautiful Captain Ginger logo on it
Wow.
is still on it. So extraordinary car like that in the collection, and many others.
And
If you
and they
guys
all have
haven't-
stories.
If you guys haven't yet, I went onto the Seal Cove website. It's an amazing view for sure.
So what's the Seal Cove website, Roberto?
Well, it's Seal Cove Auto Museum, all one word, .org.
Mm-hmm. And
All right.
so you mentioned that it was either gifted to the museum. Would you say that most of the cars there are owned by the museum or gifted to the museum, or are they on loan from collectors? How does it usually work?
We have both, all of those categories. The majority of the cars in the museum are owned by the Richard C. Payne Jr. Automotive Charitable Trust. And Richard Cushing Payne was the founder of the museum. So a number of the cars are owned by that trust and kept and maintained and displayed and showed at the museum. Another group of them are owned by the museum. They've been donated to us, we have a nice core collection, probably one of the stars of the collection, which is the only existing FRP in the world, 1917, Findlay Robertson Porter, who was chief engineer for Mercer after he left Mercer, built these extraordinary cars, one of the most sophisticated, advanced cars of its time. Only one in the world. Came through the famous Harrah collection, finally to our museum, and the museum owns that one, for instance.
Wow.
And then we do have a number of cars on loan. The museum is rather unique in that we use the cars to tell stories. So right now, for instance, there's an exhibit called Engines of Change, which is looking at the women's suffrage movement. And, we have, for instance, a small Saxon automobile all done up like one that was used by two women in a cross-country tour to promote suffrage. So we like to tell those sort of social stories with the cars. And very often to do that, I'll need to borrow, or we used to borrow and still do, a car. And I guess, a perfect example of that would be before the suffrage exhibit, we had an exhibit on automobile advertising, life and leisure, and on auto advertising. And I couldn't do a display without a bow to see the USA in your Chevrolet, being sung in all its glory. And so, of course, I had to borrow a absolutely drop dead gorgeous 57 Chevy for the display. And,
You had to.
Makes a-
You
Makes
felt
sense.
obligated.
Do you get to
with
drive
the
these
sun
cars?
being sun.
Did you?
Great.
Yeah, that's a great question. Ian. Do you get to drive them, Roberto?
You know, I do occasionally. I've got a crew that, or I keep saying it's like I still am the director there, you know, but you have to excuse me for that. But, you know, when the place is your passion, it's hard to say goodbye sometimes. There is a wonderful crew of volunteers and people there who love to work on and drive the cars. And I never was particularly great at you know, shifting when you don't have synchro mesh. So I tend to be driving with the cars to them.
So you're-
And as far as driving a Model T, boy,
Yeah.
they tried to teach me how to do that, and I
Yeah,
never
it's
picked
not
up a
easy.
Model T.
That's
It's
a
not
real-
easy.
Oh no, that's
easy.
hard. Oh my gosh. So I can just see you're driving a priceless one-of-one car from 1902, and you go into gear and you're.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
yeah, I don't
Oh,
want to
you
do
need
know
the
that.
F-Alon. You need the New York
You know, it's much
transmission
better
group.
just behave. Just behave as if you know how to do it, you know, but let somebody else actually crash the gears.
Those,
Oh my
those
God.
trannies
Oh.
are known as synchro crash.
That's very
Synchro crash.
embarrassing. Many years ago, the Brooklyn Antique Automobile Association, with a British sports car club up in Westchester, they sponsored an event. We co-sponsored an event, and these cars came across from England on the Queen Elizabeth, I guess it was, or was it the Queen? One of the ships, and they asked me to drive this like 1912 Cadillac with the leather. It had leather fenders, and I couldn't get the gears, man. I was like, and I'm driving this thing and clashing gears, and all these people are going, "Who are these people from Brooklyn? Oh my God!"
I could just see a guy on the side of the road go, "Hey, grind me a pound there, pal."
No, it was terrible. But I did get to drive in a 1941 DeSoto. I got to drive Mr. Morgan. It was from the Morgan motor car company. I got to drive him to the Waldorf Astoria in a 41
cool.
DeSoto with the power with that funny shift transmission. But the gears, man, it's very embarrassing, Roberto. I understand your pain. You don't want to see people watch you do that. It's
See,
terrible.
this is like a great example of the stories that happen when you're into cars. I mean, people who are not into cars be like, I don't understand. A car is a car, whatever. No, the car is really just kind of like your ticket to stories, to adventure. I mean, that's the way I see it.
That's
true.
true.
It's a way for you to meet new people. It's a way for you to kind of to develop new stories, even when they break down. I mean, you get amazing stories just being at the side of the road. I mean, every time
So true.
if I'm driving one of my cars, pardon me, and I break down, and I call my wife, and she's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "I'm just in the middle of a story, hon.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know how it ends yet, but I'm in the middle."
Yeah.
Roberto,
Well,
I have
I
to tell you,
also-
when you said, that you're telling a story with a vehicle, I mean, Hollywood is known for that. And I don't know about any of you guys, but after he said that, I mean, I have the want right now to head up to Maine and get a lobster and go to the Seal Cove. I don't know
Well,
about
there you
anybody
go. I
else.
mean, it's destinations too. I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of times people, what are we going to do this weekend? You
Yeah.
know?
But it's not even a destination. A lot of times it's the trip going. That's the whole point.
yeah, absolutely.
That
Especially if you
talk-
have a great car.
Yeah.
But even if you don't, I mean, you can use a modern car to go take a trip to Maine, like Jeff says, visit the Seal Cove Museum, grab a lobster roll, and probably you need to take some Brasso polish because those cars need a lot
Yeah,
of
we'll put you
attention.
into service for sure.
Yeah,
You think detailing a modern car takes time? I mean,
Oh,
look
my
at what's going on with these brass cars. I don't know how they do it.
Yeah.
This is before they had like a clear coat on the brass, right? So
Absolutely.
it's tarnishing from the minute you stop, right, Roberto?
Well, they do. I mean, the clear coat or lacquer finish is something that people will do to try to preserve the brass and that look. The problem with it is that the tarnish or the lacquer eventually starts to peel away, and so the other alternative is is you polish them.
Keep
constantly.
polishing.
And keep polishing. Now, the
Yep.
downside of that is, of course, each time you polish, it's slightly abrasive and it
Yeah, you're
begins to
taking
wear
stuff
these
off.
down. So it's always a debate. We tend to polish. We really like to keep the cars as original looking as they did the day they came out of the factory. And people polished brass in those days, and the cars show that. And there's a certain look to a polished brass that you don't get with a lacquer finish on a car.
Wow.
We also have an extraordinary collection, I should say, thinking of preserving, of absolutely original, what people now call barn find cars. But these are not barn finds. These are cars that Richard accumulated across the country back in the 1940s and early 50s. And they're absolutely extraordinary, original cars. And, you know, today, people enjoy seeing them almost as much, and in some cases more so,
Oh yeah,
than
for sure.
a restored Concours quality car.
Like they say, it's only
Ivan
original
mentioned
once.
that.
Exactly.
Ivan mentioned that a couple of weeks ago on the show, how, you know, an all original vehicle that's never been touched, you know, strikes a real chord with him. Robert brought a gentleman on who does restores Bugattis. Oh my God, he had some great stories. What a great personality he was.
Roberto, a lot of museums I know have programs for young people to get them interested in cars and this industry. Does Seal Cove have any such programs for young people?
Oh, absolutely. As I say, what we tell social stories. You have to imagine that Mount Desert Island is a major tourist attraction because of, you know, the cruise ships pull in one after the other, 5,000 people at a time hit Bar Harbor. Acadia National Park gets well over 2 million visitors a year. So in addition to obviously having a car museum for car enthusiasts, we have a car museum for tourists, for folks that are visiting the island. And so many car museums, the cars are in rows and there's technical information, and it's great if you're a car guy and you get off on all of that. But for the average tourist, it's the stories we tell about the cars that they love and makes our museum so popular on the island. And of course, a segment are children. I think one of the most fun things I used to do when I was there was whenever I would see a family come in with a little girl, I would immediately take her over to the replica Benz motor patent wagon, 1886 Benz motor patent wagon that we have, one of the original ones that Mr. Bentley built. But in any event, and tell her the story of Bertha Benz and her epic ride and you know, saving the company. So that, you know, that's it. And we also, of course, do school groups. One of the exhibits that we did just before the advertising one, so it's 3 exhibits back now, was called Auto Wars. And, you know, at one time, automobiles were banned on the island. The very wealthy families, the rusticators, as they call themselves, the wealthiest families in America who would come and summer on Mount Desert Island, they were escaping the noise and pollution of the big city. They didn't want cars. The locals, of course, did. And so there was huge friction between those two groups back and forth until finally, you know, laws were passed that allowed cars on the island, but they were blocked for a number of times. And it's part of the great history of the island, the rivalry between the different towns on the island and the rusticator story and so on. So that actually is part of this curriculum for the students, school kids on the island. And we did this wonderful exhibit and then had group after group of school kids come in specifically to be told firsthand the story of the auto wars on the island. And we do a number of educational programs as well for schools.
Well, you guys are educators. Yes.
Build the next generation. You know,
the response from the children that what's their response to seeing all this? I love to see their faces. And
well, you know, it's wonderful. The little kids, you know, are fabulous. They're so open to anything that you want to tell them. Obviously, when we fire up, for instance, the Stanley Steamer Mountain Wagon, and give rides to the kids, or one of the other cars and give them rides. They love that. But, it's interesting. You can appeal to all sorts of groups. I know that many people feel that teenagers and so on are a difficult group to get involved with museums and so on. They think it's boring. But we found that we have quite a lot of interest, again, from younger kids. And again, a lot of it has to do with the kind of personal stories that we can tell about the cars, the people that own them. Some of these people were fabulous people. I mean, Isabel Well Perkins is a perfect example. Other, especially ladies, interestingly enough, that owned some of the cars in the museum. We have a 1912 crane, for instance, that was owned by one of the wealthiest women in America. It's the only crane, in fact, in existence. The car is beautiful. But when we tell stories about these people, it kind of livens things up. And also, to be honest with you, social media and movies and so on have been a big help. When we opened the museum after Richard Payne's passing, the movie Titanic had just come out, and you can imagine how many kids would come into the movie and say, "Have you got the love car from Titanic?"
Hey.
And I'll tell you that Downton Abbey was huge for us. Huge.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it brings
it's
interest back.
finding ways of connecting.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Roberto, we thank you so much for joining us here on Autolab and telling us the story of Seal Cove. Tell us again the website that people can go to learn more about the museum.
Well, the website is an easy one. It's www.sealcoveautomuseum.org.
Great.
And obviously, the main thing I hope is that a number of folks will decide to make that car trip up to Mount Desert Island.
Yep.
Enjoy, of course, Acadia National Park. Enjoy one of those fabulous lobsters. I think the best ones.
I'm going to tell you what, I want to hit the road
Make a
tomorrow.
trip
Yeah,
over
right.
to the Seal Cove Auto Museum. You'll love it. It's a wonderful.
Roberto,
Co-pilot.
I have to say, Roberto, we have a lot of people that come on the show, and you just make me want to shut up and listen. And I have to tell you, you're
So
an
could you be back
amazing
next week,
storyteller.
Roberto? Because we want Jeff to shut up. So that's ultimately what it's all about. No, thanks. And please stick around and there's lots more really interesting stuff coming up on Autolab. So if you'd like to hang around, Roberto, I'm sure we'd all love to hear your perspective on things, right?